Welcome once again. This is Court in Session. I'm your host, Justice Hype. No, this isn't the court of law, more like the court of public opinion and factual information, where you or I could be the judge, jury, plaintiff, or defendant at any given time. And on this episode, we bring into the court the case of Karmelo Anthony, the very polarizing case of Karmelo Anthony, And before I go any further, I just want to express my sincerest thoughts and prayers with both families, as I'm sure it's a difficult time for each side of the spectrum in processing the situation. And I want to be as sensitive as I can to both sides of the spectrum in objectively looking at the facts of this case to the best of my ability and forming conclusions that can form or provide solutions to deter incidents like this from happening moving on in the future, and deterring more of our kids succumbing to violence, as we're losing too many of our kids to unnecessary violence. So moving forward, we have Karmelo Anthony, a 17-year-old student athlete who was present at a track meet. And as I said before, I want to objectively look at the facts of this case to the best of my ability and avoid a lot of the presumptions and allegations, false allegations that were embedded into this case by the media and, in my opinion, on the side of the prosecution as well. So, first fallacy that was circulating was that Karmelo Anthony was suspended from school and somehow he shouldn't have been permitted at this track and field event, and in which that was false. Karmelo Anthony was an upstanding student athlete who was doing fairly well in school, to the knowledge that I have, and was also a captain of his football team, and so in good standing in terms of both scholastically and as an athlete. And there was no history there of being violent or, as used commonly when describing Karmelo Anthony, a thug. Okay, so that was the first level of fallacy that was injected into this case. Next, it is important to mention and consider the fact that this was a self-defense case. So the question of him doing it, there was no question of whether Karmelo Anthony committed the act. The question was whether Karmelo Anthony justifiably committed the act. Was he justifiable in feeling that his safety or his life was in jeopardy? And in a self-defense case, you do not have to feel like your life is in jeopardy. You only have to feel like your safety is in jeopardy at that particular time. So, to remove the idea of premeditation, which another thing I thought was ridiculous was the defense moving forward without trying to at least try for this being a manslaughter case instead of trying to defend a murder case. Nonetheless, they went forward in such fashion. Karmelo Anthony takes shelter under this tent, which happens to be another school's tent. His school, for whatever reason, didn't provide a tent, and that is something that should be examined and questioned as a shortcoming by the school, not having a tent there. But as he gets under the tent, a very important factor to consider as well, it's raining. It's in Texas, summertime, inclement weather. He's seeking shelter. His school doesn't have a tent. So he makes his way under this tent. In the process, he runs into someone he considered a friend. And the word friend should be used operatively, as that was brought into question. And we'll use the name Eddie just for the sake of discussion here. So Karmelo Anthony runs into Eddie, someone he considers a friend, as he gets under the tent. Well, that was brought into question as Eddie tried to downplay his relation or his friendship to Karmelo Anthony, which the defense provided up to, I would say, 9 pictures, I believe it was, of Eddie and Karmelo, which discredited his downplaying of his relationship and his knowing of Karmelo Anthony. And that just lends to the idea of this being a situation in which Karmelo didn't bully his just go under the tent for no particular reason because he was looking trouble with the opposing team. There was rain, inclement weather, kids seeking shelter. His team doesn't have an adequate shelter space or tent. He takes shelter under the tent. In the process, he runs into someone he considers a friend, which would insist that at this point Karmelo would feel a little bit more comfortable, even though obviously the majority of the kids there had to be strangers. There's one person that he particularly knows under this tent, and he can ride out the weather. This is my estimation of the situation as I would see it, looking at it from a logical standpoint. In the process of Karmelo taking shelter under this tent, he is then approached by Austin Metcalf and also his brother Hunter Metcalf, which it is important to mention that Hunter and Austin Metcalf were considerably larger than Karmelo Anthony, them being 200 plus pounds and Karmelo Anthony being about 130 pounds, maybe 5'9". The Metcalf brothers, I believe they competed in the discus event of track. And so obviously these were pretty strong guys. Also, a very important factor is that they were trained from a very young age in jiu-jitsu. So this goes all into these factors, and little what seems to be minor details can all be used to form a logical outlook on how this all could have played out. And if we're just being real and exercising common sense, these are 17-year-old teenagers at a high school sporting event. There's a lot of ego, a lot of testosterone flaring, and to think that it's out of the realm of possibility for these two boys, Austin namely, to have approached them in the most calm and peaceful manner and politely asked Karmelo, hey, do you mind just possibly leaving and finding your way to another tent, or just standing in the rain and not using our tent? Does not seem plausible. Okay? There are different accounts here. Some said that Austin approached him in a calm manner and politely put his hand on Karmelo Anthony, in which Karmelo Anthony's response was, make me and touch me, or make me and see what and find out what happens, or if you touch me you'll find out what happens. None of this is conclusive. There are different accounts of what was said, what exactly was said, and once again there's no conclusive visual evidence to say audio and visually this is absolutely what took place. But we and the jurors are left to conclude exactly what happened. And once again, it has to be added that in jury selection, or I would say deselection in this particular case, there were no jurors that would meet peer or being peers of Karmelo Anthony, as there were no black jurors or jurors of color on the panel. And I believe that was deliberately done by the prosecution. Now, it is also fair to mention that jurors cannot be withheld on the basis of race or on the basis of religion. But there are other loopholes that can be used to deselect potential jurors. Like in this particular case, I believe it was said that they are educators, and therefore them being people who work in education or in the school would have bias towards the case, and in which the judge upheld such finding or such reasoning and had those jurors removed. So here it is. We had an all-white jury, and of course, in a case like this, race does play a factor, and societal, social, economic factors come into play here. Namely, on how, looking at this situation, without race injected, how a young man in that particular environment could have felt being approached in an aggressive manner. Once again, he didn't have to feel like his life was in jeopardy. He could have felt like his safety was in jeopardy. They were not on a flat surface. They were on the stands. Was the ability there for him to take off and just run like that in the moment? Like if they were on a flat surface, they were in the stands once again. Was he surrounded at that moment? Was he able to pick up his bag and just run off? All of this comes into question. And another thing that has to be examined moving forward by the village is conflict resolution. There are going to be arguments, disagreements, and unfortunately fisticuffs. As we are human and sometimes emotions go left, people aren't able to control their emotions all the time. And is it justifiable in all cases? In many cases, no, it's not justifiable. But once again, humans being humans, and we're talking about 17-year-old boys here with a lot of aggression, ego, testosterone flowing in that moment, could act out. Not logically, but more emotionally. So on one side, we have Karmelo Anthony. I believe it would have served Karmelo best to have picked up his bag and have left the tent, even if it was as a result he would get wet in the rain. He would still have his freedom, and Austin Metcalf would still be here. But looking at the situation realistically, how did he feel if, let's say, there was some type of aggressive language exchange prior and he was shoved, right? In which then he, by two persons minimum, of course, he's on at an opposing team's tent, right? So we can just assume that he didn't have a lot of allies with him over there if it had gone left, and let's say from the other end, and the Metcalf brothers had decided to further any type of aggression that was initially brought forth on their part. And let's just say it be a tussle. He would obviously be outnumbered and most likely end up getting a nice beating in that situation. And on the other hand, the Metcalf brothers, were they ever mentored or instructed in how to communicate with somebody in that particular situation to get to the goal that you wanted? You wanted Karmelo to vacate the premises. There was a particular manner that most likely would have been the most productive way of approaching that situation. And once again, just applying, I'm not saying that this is what happened, but I'm saying that this is a strong possibility and even probability that Austin Metcalf approached Karmelo Anthony in a very aggressive manner and put his hands on him even in an aggressive manner that would then make Karmelo Anthony feel like, I could possibly get beaten up here and take an L, or in any case, this ends up being bad. I could get embarrassed somehow, and that once again, this is not necessarily feeling like you're being embarrassed or disrespected is not plausible cause to act in violence and take someone's life. I do not. I want to make that very clear. I do not condone the unjustifiable violence or taking of anyone's life for no justifiable cause. This is not an open and shut case at all. And there are a lot of factors, I believe, that could have prevented this situation from taking place. I also feel like the schools should be held accountable for the simple things like providing a tent and not having adequate school safety and adults available to possibly de-escalate the situation. I asked this critical question as well. What compelled Karmelo Anthony to carry a knife? And I'm going to try to answer that question to the best of my ability. As a youth football coach, someone who has worked with ACS for a number of years and also volunteered with local organizations working with children, I know for a fact that it's very common for kids from the ages of 10 and up to carry weapons, knives specifically, but weapons in their bags and on their persons. Unless we live under a rock, we're very familiar with the numerous school shootings that have taken place over the years and the numerous confiscations of guns and weapons on school property. And it's just unfortunate, but we live in a society where our kids do not feel safe and violence is extremely prevalent. So for those who were saying that Karmelo Anthony, it's evident that Karmelo Anthony's a thug because he's coming to a track meet with a knife. No, these kids feel unsafe, very unsafe and unprotected, just in general spaces and on school property and in school spaces, which goes right back to the factor, or right back to me questioning the absence of school safety, local police, or security at a school-sanctioned event. At the end of the day, I believe that this is more of a manslaughter case than a murder case. I believe that there was a lot of bias that was injected from the way that the jury was selected, from the way that Karmelo Anthony was portrayed in the public space as a thug. And we know this is commonly done. We've seen this in numerous cases. This playbook is being used to paint the defendant in a certain light to get a particular outcome and a particular perspective from the general public, and then of course the jury as well. And it's unfortunate, as I said, it's very unfortunate that Austin Metcalf is no longer with us. His family is no longer with him, and the same goes for Karmelo Anthony, which will miss out on the remainder of his youthful days and his young adult life, as he is now sentenced to 35 years in prison. But moving forward, we have to examine and mentor. I challenge men around me all the time, and I urge men to get involved in mentorship of our young boys, our youth, and getting them in a mind frame in which they understand how to deal with inevitable conflict. We are all going to deal with some level of conflict, and of course those conflicts are going to require resolution, constructive and productive resolutions, and we cannot use someone angering us or emotion that we are feeling, that 9.9 times out of 10 is a temporary emotion that allows us to crash out as young men. We see it happen with adults. They can't even control their emotions, much less, once again, underdeveloped minds and underdeveloped inexperience as well. These are kids. They're youth, and they're experiencing life, and a lot of these things they're navigating as someone without experience. And the mentorship from the adults has to be there. The guidance has to be there from parents, of course, to especially to get to instill in our young men how to deal with conflict, how to communicate, and how to carry ourselves, our body language, the words we choose, the words we use, commonly speaking. You know, communication is a huge obstacle for a lot of the kids in this era that have been digitized by all the digital devices and this new era of learning in which people don't communicate in conventional or traditional manners as they used to. You know, a lot of these kids' communication in this day and age are emojis. You know, that's it. And the rest is just miscommunication in between, a bunch of miscommunications in between. So, wrapping up this case, it is very tragic and very unfortunate that we lost Austin Metcalf, and that Karmelo Anthony will be behind bars foreseeably for quite a long time, based on his judgment in that particular moment to act violently and subsequently take the life of Austin Metcalf. And it also, I will add it to that as well, I really don't feel that it was deliberate. He ran to a coach. He expressed concern for his well-being afterwards, immediately afterwards. So I just believe that this was a case in which Karmelo Anthony was put in a pressure situation in which his ego may have been bruised, may have been hurt, and he could have actually felt vulnerable as two larger guys confronted him, put their hands on him in whatever type of manner they did, or exchange whatever type of words they exchanged. As we know, teenage boys in a sporting setting and an environment could easily do. And he just blacked out in that moment and made a choice in haste that unfortunately is going to remain with him and cost him the rest of his life. And as I said, I don't want to be insensitive. Also, subsequently led to the demise of another young man whose life was unfortunately cut short. Let's try to limit these situations moving forward. Let's have meaningful dialogues. Men, let's get out there and mentor, talk to these youth about these situations, because this is not like just a one-off situation. This happens prevalently. This happens consistently, not only at sporting events, but just in general spaces, not only with adults, but with the youth as well. The summer has just begun. People, stay aware of your surroundings, stay vigilant, stay focused, stay hydrated, stay safe. Get in the comment section, let me know how you feel. This case is now adjourned. Peace.